European luxury companies tried to blame America's tariffs for the recent price hikes, but were unexpectedly exposed by China, who revealed the insanely greedy markups they're actually charging. Multiple European luxury brands, including Prada, Gucci, and Chanel, recently raised their already sky-high prices. These companies argued that the increases were necessary in order to protect their businesses and employees from the financial effects of the tariffs. However, this excuse angered owners of manufacturing companies in China, who took to social media to reveal that these European companies are raising prices purely out of greed. They claimed that even at a 20 to 50% tariff rate, the prices these brands charge ensure that they will still make a profit of more than 2,000%, and they have actual evidence to back up these claims, as one poster who operates an OEM factory which produces the actual products that these luxury companies put their brand on and sell to consumers. He showed that one bag, which retails at $38,000, actually only costs about $1,400 to manufacture, which is a markup of more than 2,700%.
Anyone want any of this? Yeah, lunch for tomorrow. Lululemon. And I think, yep. Okay, these are all unused, reusable bags. An entire box of them. Unclear why they were tossed. Welcome to my first unboxing video. So excited to show you all the Coach purses that I bought from Dumpster Diving Mama. As you can see, they're all slashed, which is Coach's policy. This is what they do with unwanted merchandise. They order an employee to deliberately slash it so no one can use it. And then they write it off as a tax write-off under the same tax loophole as if it were accidentally destroyed. Coach actually...
Please check her stuff out. I just happened to came across her. Probably because I've been creating all these kind of videos. This is a thing where maybe unlike her and other activists, which I'm not idealistic about it. I'm not hopeful about it. We're not going to change. We are a country, a nation that is built on consumption. We love to consume. Our economy is intertwined with consumption. So I've said this before with my other videos. Please check it out. The whole tariff things with China, I think it's going to be eventually resolved. I think we will not, even if it could be better for us, we're not going to bring back manufacturing. We're not. Trump will cave. China will cave. Whatever. All I've said in my videos is that if we can cut ties with China, if we can cut down on consumption, I wouldn't cry. I would actually love it. But if we can't, it is what it is. Because sometimes it's just depressing to see what we are doing to our world. We are overproducing food. Whole bunch of I mean, just you name it. We're overproducing it, and honestly, we're not giving it to the poor or anything because it's. I think it's a money thing. It's not. You can't write it off on the tax, or the company will be charged. Whatever legal shit it is. And you see companies like luxury brands. They're not going to donate their goods. They're not going to donate. They're not going to give their goods. They're not going to cut down prices because it will offset or it will damage their logo or their brand. Because honestly, their brand is just Chinese-made purses, goods with their logo plastered on it. So it's just, I don't know. I want better for the human race because us being such disgusting consumers. I'm not saying I'm anyone better. I suffer from it too. But if we could, it would be so much better for the human race. But I'm not idealistic. We can't do it. But things like that just shows me why, deep down, I wish we could.
Hello from China. Let me show you the United States products in my home. Nothing. Do you have something from China in your home?
Wants the world to think that China is the defender of free trade, when in reality, China doesn't really practice free trade. They practice something called mercantilism, where they want access to everyone else's market, but they don't want other countries to have access to the Chinese market. That's why they have banned Google in China, that's why they have banned Facebook, Instagram, and even this video, YouTube is banned in China. CCP doesn't want foreign companies to come into China and compete with Chinese companies. All the while, they incentivize local companies to expand using free money so they can go out to other countries and put foreign companies out of business. Let me explain what I mean by this, because this is clearly a big accusation, but it's not just an accusation. Chinese steel is a perfect example of this practice. You see, CCP gives out a lot of free money in form of subsidies to steel companies in China to build up bigger and bigger factories. Now, of course, this is something a lot of countries do. They support their growing industries by giving them subsidies and tax incentives. But CCP has taken this to another level, and that's because CCP's goals are much more sinister than just supporting a growing industry. You see, CCP kept on subsidizing the Chinese steel industry even after the local steel demand was met. That means China had more than enough production to fulfill all the demands that Chinese customers had. But the goal for CCP wasn't just to satisfy Chinese customers. The goal was to flood the foreign markets with cheap Chinese steel. That way, foreign companies just go out of business. Think about it. Let's say you're an American steel producer. You have to put in your own money to build a factory, you have to put in your own money to buy or rent a land, and then you have to put in your own money, or I guess use bank loan to pay your workers, pay for supplies, and everything. You cover the cost for your business. Then once the steel is ready, you go to market with your production, and you sell it at a price that you are coming out with a little bit of profit. Because at the end of the day, that's why you're taking this much of a risk, to make profit. But with Chinese steel companies, the equation is drastically different. Chinese companies don't have to worry about paying for land, they don't have to worry about paying for rent, because CCP just gives them a lot of free money as subsidies. They also don't have to worry about paying interest on the loan that they take out from state banks in China, because CCP gives them loan for either no interest or cheaper rates. On top of that, sometimes CCP also helps subsidize the supplies that go into producing steel. This way, when a Chinese company goes to a foreign market, let's say here in America, they don't need to sell it at a market price to make a profit. They can sell it for much cheaper than an American company and still make a profit, and that means American companies just cannot compete with Chinese steel because the CCP is subsidizing the steel production. Then slowly and slowly, all the foreign steel companies will just go out of business. Now CCP's goal with this is simple. If there's ever a war in the future, CCP doesn't want foreign countries to have factories that can produce steel. They don't even want foreign countries to have any type of factories that can produce anything. Because think about it, what did we do in World War II? We used a lot of our factories that were producing consumer products and we switched them to produce war-related products. And CCP knows this. That's why it wants to put every factories out of business. And they're using subsidies and free money to put other companies out of business. When other countries start fighting back against this, CCP does the performative acts that I just pointed out earlier in the video and tell the world, just to show the world, that China is the defender of free trade. Here we have JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon explaining exactly why we need to become less dependent on China and Russia in case there's a war in the future.
China and Russia have made it clear they want to kind of dismantle the post-World War II system. And I think the goal of all this trade stuff should be to make Europe and our trading partners, Japan, Korea, Philippines, stronger, not weaker, bring them closer as we build up our military. And any trade that protects military, that we should definitely do. I mean, we made a lot of mistakes about, as you know, pharmaceuticals, shipping, pharmaceutical ingredients, penicillin.
That we're so reliant on China for all of this stuff.
We can't rely on any potential adversary for things we need for our military. And so, there I'm quite sympathetic. That we should do. That's absolutely paramount. But the point about national security is economic security, national security are almost directly related in the long run. Hopefully when these wars get resolved, and I hope in the interest of Ukraine, where they have sovereignty was over, and the interest of Israel, not being constantly attacked by terrorists on three sides, you need to keep the economic alliance together. I think it would be in Russia's and North Korea's, Iran's, and China's interest to fragment the Western world. And I think that would be the biggest long-term mistake. I'm talking about over 30 or 40 years. I don't want to read the book about how the West was lost.
This is exactly why China is freaking out right now, because China knows it cannot just replace US demands because they have built up all the factories, all this overcapacity to compete with US businesses and to satisfy US consumer demand. But on the other hand, US consumers can take their demand and direct it to some other country. Now, I'm sure many of you guys know that we're going to have some pain for short term, but at the end of the day, China has a lot more to lose than the United States.
Right. Now, when you think about this with tariffs, you say, okay, who's flexible and who's inflexible? We can reallocate our demand across borders. Factories that are already built cannot move. They are stuck where they are. China has developed factories for selling to the US consumer market. They have trained workers for selling to the US consumer market. We can move our demand across borders. Those factories and citizens cannot move. They're stuck where they are. And so the incidence will fall on them, just as in the property tax example, right? Now, does this automatically happen on day one? No. But will this happen in the fullness of time? Absolutely. This is just the basic economics of incidence in public finance. And and if the incidence is falling on other countries because they're inflexible, the Chinese now have to find someplace else to absorb their demand, to absorb their excess supply. And guess what? There isn't anywhere else to absorb their excess supply. Who's going to buy as much as American consumers? Nobody, right? There is no place else to absorb their excess supply.
That means that this move by China is purely performative for everyone else. It's purely optics. China wants everyone to believe that China is a defender of free trade, when in reality, this is just a pure scam.
Your company exports to dozens of countries, including China. Chinese leaders now say they're prepared for a full-on trade war with the United States. If China stops buying Marlin steel, how much of a hit will your business take, or will the tariffs help you in other ways that make up for it?
Tariffs are going to be very good for the American manufacturing worker. We're very excited about this new leveling of the playing field. Right now, when we export, for example, this basket to Germany, right here, it's a precision medical basket, a medical device basket. When we ship that to Germany, the German government taxes our clients $128.95 per basket. If a German competitor ships it to America, it's $1.25 per basket. It is so unfair what's happening to the American worker. They can't compete when you have that kind of unlevel playing field. We're talking about an opportunity, finally, to create a lot of millions of American jobs, middle-class jobs, if we could get it fair. We're not looking for something over the German factory workers or the British factory workers, the Chinese factory workers. We just want to be fair. If we're fair, the American technology, creativity, work ethic is going to just do extraordinary things. And we're going to create millions of American jobs with this new paradigm. It's wonderful news.
It would be great to have the American manufacturing base back in the United States. I wonder how you counter the arguments of people such as Vice President J.D. Vance a few years ago. He feels differently now. But a few years ago, he was saying it's less about tariffs and more about automation and education when it comes to manufacturing jobs in the United States. What do you say to that?
Well, absolutely. You have to have automation and you have to have clever manufacturing techniques. We have 7-degree engineers. We make everything in Baltimore, everything in Indiana, everything in Michigan. We import nothing. But we're using wonderful innovations, novel ideas, coming up with crazy great new products. And then what happens is, over in China, they totally cut and paste our innovations and put it on their websites. This is what we're competing against. They're using slave labor to compete against us. They're debasing their currency. The stakes are so unfair for the American worker. Let's just try to have things fair, and we're going to whoop them. We're going to hire millions of people throughout our country. You got to remember, 50% of Americans don't own stock. millions of Americans don't have $250 in any kind of war chest emergency fund. Why is that? That's because they're working at jobs where they can't get paid well.
So among those who own stock are your employees, because you offer your employees a 401k match. Have any of them said anything to you about their concerns about the direction of the stock market, particularly any who might be close to retirement?
We absolutely have had a couple people anxious about the stock market. But again, our goal is that we're going to sell millions more dollars, so we have to hire many more people. If we do that, we're going to hire them at very good jobs, with very good pay, wonderful benefits with the 401k match. True, there's some companies that have been buying T-shirts from Vietnam and China, and they're going to have to pay a couple more bucks for a T-shirt, and then the American consumer is going to have to pay more for a T-shirt. That's obviously not pleasant for those American consumers. But I think there's going to be an overwhelming surge of hiring in America as things level out, as American factories ramp up, and people have to hire talent, buy machines. We've invested money in buying new machines because we're so enthusiastic, so optimistic about the future. That's going to start happening throughout the nation, and people are going to be leaning into the future. This is a very exciting time for the American manufacturing worker. We're going to be able to pull people from poverty into the middle class that used to not have an avenue. They had no shot at getting into the middle class. We're going to be able to offer them a shot.
If Drew Greenblatt was my CEO, I would actually take lower wages to work for this dude. And the average viewer of CNN can't wrap their minds around this, okay? Remember, CNN caters to rich, white liberals. They don't understand the working class. As a matter of fact, they sell the working class down the river if it means that they get a little more of social clout. That's how terrible these rich, white liberals actually are at their core. Their hearts are black, their minds are smooth, and there's nothing going on of value in their own circles. They don't understand that U.S. Steel has degenerated so far that Pittsburgh, by the way, the home of the Steelers, the NFL team, the Steelers no longer represent the working class of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is now what's the best way to define it? They had to pivot about a decade ago and become one of the more tech-savvy cities. So they're full of these West Coast yuppies, and truth be told, they're not a working-class city anymore. And that's where a whole lot of people have moved from. They've moved from the Rust Belt down south, either because their jobs have dried up or because their jobs have moved elsewhere. That's what happens when Democrat policy strangles you to the point where you can't breathe anymore and you move elsewhere. So Drew Greenblatt is beyond thankful that Donald Trump is trying something different with these tariffs because he's making the manufacturing era of the Rust Belt dollarable again. This is sort of a problem with the old national parks. Back when we were starting the National Park Service, I'm sorry, I am going somewhere with this tangent. When we started the National Park Service, Congress didn't want to give it any money. They didn't really care about these areas. They wanted to log it and mine it into oblivion. And then presidents came along and said, no, we need to preserve these areas. And finally, someone came up with the idea that let's make these areas dollarable. That means market these areas in a different light. Show that these areas are better than the European Alps. Show that these areas are better than Niagara Falls. Show that these areas out west and east of the country, there are some beautiful places in our eastern seaboard. The Appalachian Mountains, just to name a place. But my point is that in order to make the national parks viable, you needed to make it dollarable. And that's the problem with U.S. manufacturing right now. There is so much money to be had in other nations. Mexico, for instance, NAFTA. After watching a slow decline of our manufacturing arena, after watching a slow decline of our manufacturing, the NAFTA agreement basically made Mexico an incredibly wealthy nation, which they completely squandered, but they also have been able to take some power from the Chinese nationals and moved it into other parts of Southeast Asia. So that is basic capitalism, that is basic trade, that's history in a nutshell. So there's something deeper going on here that Jake Tapper doesn't fully understand, and that Drew Greenblatt fully understands, and that is a little, almost a throwaway line here that Drew Greenblatt was talking about, and he's talking about what China is trying to do and what they've already done to the American sector. They've basically taken America, they've mined it for information, they've stolen that data, and they're trying to facilitate it there in their own nation, and it's kind of failing. But to reiterate this point, Mr. Wang, which by the way is a CEO of a West Coast-based intelligence company, Mr. Wang cited an anecdote by a former head of research and development for a Fortune 100, not 500, 100 company, who told him that the person he entrusted the most, someone so close that their children grew up together, was eventually found to be on the payroll of the Chinese Communist Party. What does this have to do with tariffs then? Well, simply put, if the Chinese Communist Party is stealing our information, and they're trying to change their own economy to basically eclipse that of the West, particularly the United States, that means that there needs to be something we can do as a nation to deal with them. We can't sanction them like we do with Russia and Belarus, but we can tariff them. That's the whole point and purpose of these tariffs. It's not to punish the American consumer. That's going to happen. That's a terrible, terrible byproduct, but it's the best weapon we have in our arsenal. We can't sanction China because too much of world trade is centered around them. So we're going to have to do something different. While they've been stealing our information, while they have been trying to unlock American secrets, which, by the way, that's just good old-fashioned elbow grease in our culture, in Western culture, that the Chinese can't fully comprehend because they've got their own thing going on. But the whole point and purpose of these tariffs are an attempt to get back something that which was stolen. Drew Greenblatt understands this, and like I said, if I had to work a different job, I'd love to work for this dude, and I'd work for lower wages, even though it's in the state of Maryland, which is poorly run by Democrats, because we know Democrats can't govern, but that's the sad truth of this whole situation. These tariffs are an attempt to bring back something that was stolen. Okay? I think that's the best way I can put this, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. Let me know if tariffs are hitting you yet, because we need to see what we can do to bring back a middle-class style job like manufacturing in order to make America wealthy again, in order to make people in Appalachia, in the Rust Belt, have some good jobs for the next 20, 35 years in order to ensure that their families have food on the table and property that they can own. That's the American dream here.
I think Donald Trump has a unique ability to break the brains of some of the smartest people in the world. Case in point.
It would be hard to think of a more elegant way to reduce prosperity this fast. Let's talk about Apple. The notion was we were going to bring back all those great jobs. The average Apple assembly person in China makes $500 a month. The average Apple employee focusing on more high-value things like design, store management, makes $200,000 a year here. We want to wear Nikes. We don't want to make them. We have outsourced low-wage jobs overseas such that we can create more profits, more investments, and create higher-wage jobs.
That was Scott Galloway. He just so happens to be an old professor of mine at NYU, but he makes the claim here that, quote, we have outsourced low-wage jobs overseas such that we can create more profits, more investments, and create higher-wage jobs. Except, is that even true? Do we actually have higher wages? Let's reference some data from this book called Adrift, America in 100 Charts by, oh look, Scott Galloway. Let's start with this chart, productivity relative to hourly compensation. It seems to me that over time, Americans have become way more productive, but our wages have not kept pace. Here's another one, total minimum wage versus total economic productivity, showing that if minimum wage had risen with productivity, it would be at $22 an hour versus $7.25, the actual minimum wage. The percentage of people making more than their parents, dropping steadily over time. A millennial born in 1984 only has a 50% chance of making more than their parents did, compared to 1940 when 90% of children could expect to make more than their parents. This is all data that he put together, so what the hell? Is he suffering from a case of TDS? Or maybe his stock portfolio was the only thing he truly cared about. Anyway, feel free to follow me if you want to see more breakdowns of what I call mainstream media punditry slop.